Right, so good evening to everyone and welcome to our public meeting hosted by MSD Pike Township School Board. We want to open up tonight with our statement, and then after our statement of purpose, we'll open up for any type of public comment that you may want to have tonight along these lines. So listen attentively as we state our purpose for tonight. Purpose of our meeting is to discuss the proposed development at Traders Point and its potential impact on the school district. A public forum, and we will have a public forum tonight, and we'll allow comments and questions. The board intends this to be an open forum to present all viewpoints of those who wish to speak. As background, the board has very limited information about the development in this potential Trader Point area and the impact that it will have on our school district. In the lead up to this meeting, board representatives have been in communication with various community groups, some of which are here tonight and will speak. Board representatives also have been in communication with and have with our representatives developer, which is their attorney, who have provided the board with information about the development, but have declined to attend this evening's meeting. In the interest of time, and to allow all who wish to speak time to do so, comments will be limited, and usually we limit comments in a regular board meeting to 3 minutes, but we'll be a little longer than that and a little generous than that tonight. But we ask that no one, for the good of the entire public meeting, hog all the comments. Otherwise, we'll ask you to retire your comments at that time. And as always, please keep your comments respectful and only limited to the topic, so we don't want to go off the beaten path to other things tonight. So please limit your comments to the topic itself. And then one last statement also before we open it up is that the board, the administration was notified, the corporation back in March, as a notification went out to our entire district, especially the stakeholders. So we were notified in the administration in March, but unfortunately, sometimes things get through us and by us. And so once the board was made aware in July the 31st to be exact, then the board began to get involved once we were made aware. And Mr. Leroy Robinson's defense, he did call us and make us aware of this development. So with that said and stated, we're grateful tonight to have Susan Blair, who is here with us tonight, and she did state to me her desire to share tonight publicly. So Susan is the president, I believe, of the Neighborhood Association. Why don't you come and introduce yourself and share for the good of the cause tonight, Susan Blair.
All right, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
So I do have, do you have copies of the site plan?
As a board, we all do. We don't have them with us, but we do have copies, yes.
Okay, all right. I've made 50 copies for anyone in the audience that has not seen the most recent site plan, and if you would like one. Marty, would you?
The district gonna help us pass them out. You got some guy,
Oh,
you got
okay.
some soldiers coming right there. They're gonna help us.
Thank you, soldiers. Appreciate it. Okay, as you said, President Webster, this petition has been ongoing for quite a while. We first got the legal notice in March, and actually, their counsel, Murray Clark, came to PTRA's meeting in December of last year as a preliminary. What that means is they hadn't filed yet, and they were just bringing it to us as kind of a heads up. We didn't hear anything further from them from that point on. We didn't notify anyone. I had hoped they had changed their mind. But subsequently in March, we received the petition. This has gone to 2 hearings. It went to the hearing examiner of the Metropolitan Development Commission. That's one person that makes a recommendation to the full commission. That happened on July 27th, and she recommended approval. We had a pretty good remonstrance. The Pike Township Residents Association voted to oppose, and of course, the Traders Point community was overwhelmingly opposed. But she recommended approval, so an appeal was filed by PTRA to the full commission, and that hearing took place on, was it the 11th? 16th, I'm sorry, August 16th. Again, we had another good remonstrance, but unfortunately, the commission, there were 8 commissioners in attendance. There's 9 on the commission. 1 was absent, or it may be a vacant position, I'm not sure which. 8 commissioners voted, 6 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstained. So the next step in the process is the City County Council, and that's where Councilor Robinson comes in. I just learned today, I was working very hard to try to determine when this would go to council. We expected it to go September the 11th, but I learned today, after really trying to find out, is it hasn't been certified by the Department of Metropolitan Development yet. And until the petition, the commitments, the site plan are certified, it will not go to the council.
So chances are September 11th won't happen.
It's not going to happen
Thank
because
you.
the deadline to file that has passed. So it could be October, it could actually be later. But I will certainly keep you, Pastor Webster, apprised.
Thank you.
So what this development will pertain, and I'll speak on behalf of the developers to some degree since they're not here, and just give you information. I'm not here to be opposed or in favor, just here to give you information. This 200-acre parcel abuts 465 on the west side between 86th Street to the north and 79th Street to the south. The east border is Conroe Road. I'm sorry, the west border. Yeah, I said that wrong. Thank you for the correction. What it will contain is commercial life science of some sort, a medical healthcare use, more commercial, retail, hotel, mixed-use, multifamily, which is where I would think the school board would be interested in.
What's that mean?
And then another mixed-use, multifamily on the west side. Their plan is to construct a road through the development, and that will be an extension of Marsh Road, which currently ends at 79th Street. So that will be extended
86.
from 79th to 86. In our conversations, we discussed traffic flow. They were required, the developers were required, to submit a traffic study. The Department of Public Works had requested that as part of their zoning request, and they did produce the traffic study. DPW reviewed it and approved it. They also submitted it to NDOT, which of course is the state transportation department, because the roundabout on 86th Street will fall into NDOT's jurisdiction because it's too close to the entrance and exit ramps. Now, the question is, and we still haven't gotten an answer, who's paying for this? Is it the taxpayers paying for this? Is the state paying for part of it? The city paying for the other? We still don't have that clear-cut answer.
Susan, can I ask a question? If any board member want to ask a question, you certainly can.
Certainly.
But, so are you saying the traffic study was approved, or did the roundabout get approved?
The Department of Public Works approved what they had submitted along with their traffic study for the improvements that they needed made. They also had several meetings with, and I'm going to use an acronym of DPW, that we were not privy to. We tried to get a meeting with DPW as well. They declined our suggestion.
Question.
Yes,
Ms. Blair, you said something about who's paying for it.
yes.
In situations like this, districts and townships usually lose.
Yes,
We're going to lose some TIF dollars.
possibly.
No. No.
They have said, the developers have said, they are not applying for TIF. Now, that could change, but as of now, they have no intentions of requesting a TIF.
You believe that?
We'll see what happens.
You know what TIFs does to a district, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you that,
Beg pardon? TIFs are tax TIFs.
tax incremental financing.
Incremental TIFs that they take away to bring a developer in. So for instance, that developer might have a development that's 5 years. He might not have to pay taxes for 4 years.
It's usually an incentive to either to retain a business or an incentive to obtain a business.
And then going back, Ms. Blair, if I might, that's where your school district emergency units and things of that nature suffer because you have people who are sitting on councils who are trying to get economic development in areas, and as they try to get economic development in areas, they give away the tax base, and which hurts our emergency, our education, and so that's why I thought our president made a great decision by calling this meeting tonight, because if you don't know who's doing it now and the train is on the track, you're going to be surprised that TIFs are going to be a part of the process, because that's all they have to offer most people to come in for economic development. And it's going to hurt the township. They talk about, I hear, a $5 million tax break or tax relief. I don't know if you heard that, but that isn't enough for what they're going to be doing in the next 10, 15 years in that particular situation. And I'm going to say what I have to say, and then I'm going to just shut up and listen to everybody else. But we cannot afford in Pike Township to have a district under this superintendent to gain the momentum that it is gaining and not have economic developers come in here and not do something to enhance the work of this superintendent in Pike Township. Mm-hmm. Now, we got fire trucks and sirens. We get plenty of that. And all I'm basically saying in that scenario, and I want to be clear, you can never stop economic development. You cannot adjust the Ola cart. They're going to do that. But we have to be able to talk about making what we already have in Pike healthy or healthier. And so all I'm saying in this scenario is this district is much better than it was 2 years ago. And Ms. Blair, when you go to these meetings, I would love to hear you start talking about when these economic developers are coming through, because they're going to be coming through after this gets started. What are you going to do to improve the township as it relates to the education piece? You have that type of clout to ask that particular question, because all we're doing is giving our tax tips away, and we're not getting anything out of it but an increase. Our taxes are going to go up, and we have to look at our school district to keep it viable and strong. I'm done.
Thank you.
Susan, I also have a couple of questions. So when you had said that you have asked who is paying for this, can you talk a little bit about what response did you get, or did they give you like a time frame where they could answer that question?
The response was, we're still looking at that. When we, at the commission hearing on the 16th of August, this is the first time I had heard this, one of the commissioners asked their counsel, as well as the developers, if any of this development, particularly this area, which they referred to as a public park, it's not really a public park per se, but they're willing to have the public come into their development and use it. But the commissioner was a little concerned that meant they were going to turn this over to the city parks department, and of course then it would be into their budget. And their response was no, they will retain ownership of it. It's just that the public can come in and use it. Then they were asked further about any city funding, and the answer was no, we don't plan to ask for any city funding, with the exception of the road extension. That's the first time we had heard that. Now, again, it sounds like, I don't have any information, they didn't follow up on it, and the commissioners didn't ask further questions, and unfortunately, we're not permitted to ask questions. But it sounds like they're going to contribute some funds, and then they're wanting the city to contribute some funds. Now, I did ask the question of the developers, will this be a private road, or is it going to be dedicated? Their answer was it would be dedicated. And what that means is when a developer comes in and puts a road in, if it meets city standards and the city has to approve that, then they can dedicate it to the city. The developer pays for it, but they dedicate it to the city so that the city is responsible for the ongoing maintenance of that road. And they did say that it would be dedicated. The council also said that they were committed to the road improvements. Well, what does committed mean? Does it mean financially? Does it mean you're just committed to see it through? We don't have those answers.
Means TIF, Ms. Blair.
And it could very well be, just so you know, that they anticipate, this plan is conceptual because they don't have any end users yet. They anticipate this to be a 20 to 25, maybe even 30-year project. Now, at the commission hearing, I brought up Tech Park. And Tech Park was zoned in 1999. It was a very contentious zoning. I was on PTRA in 1999. I can believe that. I wasn't the president. I became president in 2001. But during that time, it was very contentious. It did get approved. It's still not finished. We're 25 years later, and there's still quite a bit of land there. So this could take that long. It could happen quicker. Who knows? We don't have any idea. Now, the mixed-use multifamily is going to be apartments. They haven't given us a firm number on that because, again, this is conceptual. They don't have end users yet. They mentioned something like Ironworks, if you know where Ironworks is, 86 in Keystone area, with retail, restaurants, whatever on the bottom floor, and then apartments above. That's their vision. That's what they would like to see there, but they don't have an end user yet. The other portion, which is down here, what I was referring to is up here, which is 17.2 acres. This portion down here is 18.5 acres. And during our negotiations, which we heavily negotiated, they did agree to allocate 10 acres of this 18.5 to be fee simple housing, which means home ownership. Not apartments, not rentals. And-
Is it affordable housing?
No.
Okay.
And it really can't be because of the development costs and the cost of the acreage that they're having to spend. Kite Realty owns these properties right now,
Yes, ma'am.
and they have a high price tag on the per acre price.
Now, if the city's involved in this development, in many cases, when they do build, they always put in the contract so many percentages of affordable housing, like
Yes, they do.
30%.
Yes, typically, if
Which
there's
is-
any financing involved, yes, that's usually a requirement.
Which is in many cases a big lie. There's no affordable housing downtown. When it was all when it was all designed, it was designed for affordable housing, but it never happened. Then you talk about the ironworks look that we see on 86 and Keystone. That is not affordable housing.
No, it is not.
And so the 10 acres you're talking about is going to be home ownership, and home ownership on 10 acres of ground.
And they have committed to that in their commitments, and it will either be condominium or townhomes. It won't be single-family homes. And quite frankly, in a development like this, I don't think single-family homes would sell.
Yeah, comment out there, Ms. Blair.
Susan, to clarify, it's zoned against certain government subsidized housing right now, is that right? There was some zoning that prevented affordable housing, I thought.
The zoning that exists today that they are changing is DA, which stands for Dwelling Agriculture. Some of this, both of these, there's several parcels there, but predominantly 2 parcels were both farmed at one time. The other zoning is D1, which stands for dwelling, basically 1 unit per acre. And then D2, which is the same, 2 dwellings per acre. So affordable housing is typically in your apartments, which is much higher in your zoning classification, such as a D6, D7, D8, up in there, that range. The comprehensive land use plan, which is a requirement by state statute that every municipality has to do. The last one was in 2018, I believe, for Pike. Well, actually, this time they did the whole Marion County. Previous comprehensive plans, and I've worked on several of them, were township specific. But then this last one they did the county as a whole. And that plan recommends low-density, suburban-type housing of probably 1 or at no more than 2 units per acre. At the hearing, I argued that should it be developed, and we recognize it will be, it's not going to sit there. It's been unoccupied for probably somewhere around 20 years. Kite bought the first property in 2004. We don't know when they bought the second property, which they abut each other, but we're suspecting it was probably 2006 or so. When that happened, then, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. So back to the comprehensive plan. What I argued at the hearing was that if it were developed per the plan today, there might need to be a zoning change depending on how they laid it out. They would certainly need to get rid of the agricultural piece. But we would realize property tax dollars much quicker than this development. Because we all know, I think everybody here knows, that there's a shortage of single-family homes. And they would sell fast. We believe that they would sell very fast, even though they abut the interstate. And we heard that argument over and over. Well, it's on the interstate. No, that's not true. Chestnut Hills, which is between 71st and 79th, off of Marsh Road and abuts 465, was developed in the early 90s, sold very quickly.
So how was that received from the developer?
They just claim, well, their counter argument is that, look, this property's been on the market for 2 years, and we've had no interest. There has been no interest residentially. My counter argument was, of course, there's not going to be when you're asking $200,000 an acre for the land. I have already spoken to 2 well-known builders who both told me there's not a residential builder that can touch that for that price. So, any rate, during our negotiations, there is a portion of this land, of these parcels, that is in woodlands and wetlands. Drainage is a big issue, a big concern. And Martin Risch, who's here this evening as well, is a retired U.S. geological hydrologist. And he did a lot of analysis on the drainage, where it will ultimately go, and it ends in Eagle Creek Reservoir. So that is certainly a concern of PTRA's, and it was one that we argued, and he did a really good presentation. But as typical with zoning cases, and this is a frustration of mine personally, zoning come first. None of the plans are required until the zoning is changed. And that's the city rules. And the reason they do that is because it's very expensive to do the plans, and a developer doesn't want to commit those funds until they know for sure that they have their zoning. They contend that they'll make the drainage better. But what if it isn't? We have situations throughout Pike and other areas of Marion County where drainage, development did impact the drainage. And then after the fact, trying to get someone to own up to responsibility of it is very challenging.
Did they offer a plan on how they would make it better?
No.
Not really. Because again, they've done very preliminary. They do have an engineering firm that they're working with called Structure Point. Structure Point did a very preliminary assessment, but all they said was everything that they're going to have to do to make the road work will help the drainage on the west side. That is where our concern is, because everything flows west. And in this process, I learned that even water from the east side of 465 ends up on this parcel. A Park 100 and the Traders Point Shopping Center, they both end up on these parcels. So it is, it's a major concern, but as typical, the commission said, there's a process for that. We have a department that'll handle that, and that's the Department of Public Works. And those site plans, those drainage plans will have to be approved. So they unfortunately didn't give a lot of deference to it, which I really kind of expected, although I requested that they pay attention to it because I felt that this particular case was different than a lot of others.
Ms. Blair, I have a
Yes.
question. So a few times in your explanation to us, you've mentioned promises or things that the developer has said. What makes the developer accountable for these things that they are saying and representing in their negotiations with our city council or just with our city overall in our community?
Okay, well, there are ordinances. There is an ordinance that says that you have to contain your own water. You have to contain your own runoff to your site. But again, when that doesn't happen, then trying to get that enforced is challenging. There's also commitments, and they did, through negotiations, we came up with, like, I believe there's 28 commitments now. Some of them are not enforceable. They're more of gestures, good faith gestures.
Could you give us an idea what those look like?
Sure.
What those 28 look like?
I don't know if you want me to read them all.
I just kind of like to hear them.
Okay, I need to go get my other file because I
We
didn't
can
bring-
wait, Ms. Blair. I'd like to
Thank
hear.
you.
Yeah, love to hear that. President, you don't mind?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, President.
And Ms. Blair, while you're walking back in place, I guess that's like the root of the question. So they make these 28 promises. How are they held accountable for these 28 promises?
That's a city enforcement as well.
Okay.
There is a department called Business and Neighborhood Services, previously named Department of Code Enforcement, and that is their responsibility to enforce any commitments that are on file. Any commitments that are garnered do not run with the developer, they actually run with the land. So if they were to sell it for some reason, then the commitments stay.
Thank you.
Now, when they don't comply, which has happened, then there is another, I guess you wouldn't really call it a department, it's part of the mayor's office. It's called the city prosecutor. Now, that's not the same as the criminal prosecutor. It's a different prosecutor. And that person is charged with enforcing through the courts what the commitment that isn't being abated. Okay, list of commitments. The first one, and I'm not going to read all of them because it's
You don't have to, and
pretty
basically you
lengthy.
could just hit them and keep going. You don't have
Yeah.
to explain.
The first one, it's kind of typical language, Fair Housing Act and that sort of thing. The number 2 is prohibited uses. So what they have applied for is a classification called commercial special, CS, C-S. And with that, they have to submit a site plan, and they actually have to develop to this site plan, or they have to file an amendment and go through the public process again. When they file for a CS, they also say the uses, which district they're going to have uses in. So the commercial district goes from C1 to C7. And each number up is more intense. Your neighborhood, number 1, your CS or your C1 is office use. Your C3 is your retail use, such as your neighborhood services, your grocery stores, your Walmarts, your dry cleaners. Unfortunately, liquor stores are in that too. And then there's C4, which is the next classification, and that includes anything below, which is retail, again, and office, but it also includes your nightclubs and automobile-related uses, auto repair, that's those items. So PTRA went through the ordinance and pulled out what we consider to be the most egregious uses in those 2 classifications, because their petition says their request is to a CS that will include C3 and C4 uses. So we went through those. We asked for prohibited uses that fall in both of those districts, and they agreed to a lot of them. Firearm sales, pawn shops, a department store, nightclubs, of course, tattoo parlors. I mean, this is primarily because this is an all-residential area. There is no commercial in Traders Point until you get to Lafayette Road, and then it's very sparse. So they agreed to a lot of them. Some of them they wouldn't agree to. One of them was liquor store. They wouldn't agree to that one.
Meaning they will allow the liquor store, right?
Yes, yes. They committed to, and this is an example of a gesture commitment that has no validity. Assistance to community with NDOT. Commitment to assisting neighborhood groups in approaching NDOT to request that I-465 interchange is included in their overall redesign studies of I-465 and 865 traffic flow in an effort to address backups during rush hour at 86th Street. There's nothing there for the city to enforce. It's just a good gesture. They're committing to assist us with working with NDOT. So that means nothing. But an example of a commitment that does mean something, the fee simple ownership, this commitment number 15. A minimum of 10 acres within the development shall be fee simple ownership properties, i.e. occupant-owned townhomes, condominium units, or independent living units, meaning senior housing. They originally told us that they wanted senior housing on this property, but they ended up removing that later. So back to the wetlands, and in part of the negotiations, originally with their first site plan, everything was filled in with development, including this green space that you see down here. At the hearing examiner's hearing, this is my impression, it's just a personal opinion, I think they were a little surprised by Martin's testimony about the wetlands, about the drainage. And one of the requirements, too, for zoning that was passed in 2016 with the new zoning codes, they are now required to do a tree inventory and submit it to the city. In that process, they discovered they have over 500 heritage trees in this, primarily in this area, but also in this area as well. What that means is the city has a definition of what a heritage tree is. It's a certain caliber of size. Typically, it means age, of course. And if they remove the heritage tree, then they have to replace it. And they're supposed to try to replace it on their site if they can. And if they can't, then they're supposed to allocate that to city property. Primarily, they put them in city parks. There is a graduated number. So if, let's say, the heritage tree is 30 feet in diameter, or 30 inches in diameter, I'm sorry, then there's a number. So it's not one for one, is what I'm saying. If they take down a really large heritage tree, they may have to replace it with 10 other trees. Now, granted, it's going to take a long time for those trees to get to that size, and we all know that. But I believe once after Martin's presentation, I think they took a second look and said, oh my goodness, this is going to be really costly for us. So then they decided to dedicate this green space down here as a preservation district, so it will not be developed. They also referred to it, and they said this at the hearing as well, although it's not in the commitments yet. They are willing to turn this into a conservation district, which then it would be pretty much protected in perpetuity. If they don't do that and they just leave it as a preservation district, they still own it. They could come back and modify the commitments, which is another public process, and actually develop that. So we're hopeful, and I've asked for the language of conservancy in the commitments. I don't know if they're going to include it.
Ms. Blair? Mm-hmm. Is that also considered a buffer zone for the neighbors on Conner Row?
Yes, it is.
Is that one of the reasons that they would make that commitment was,
Partially, but they didn't do that initially.
right,
They're going to develop it all the way.
oh, right up to the property lines?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
right.
Yeah, we believe they took a second look at it and thought, you know, this is really going to be costly. There's also a dam on the property, which I didn't know, but Martin found it. And it's in very bad shape. So they're going to be required to upgrade that dam because it's necessary. They have to have it for the west runoff. The other thing that they did is this area here is all residential. And originally, with their full site plan that they had, this all being developed as well, they only had a 52-foot buffer here for these homes. They did increase that to 100 feet. And they have agreed, again, it's not in the commitments, but it's been a verbal discussion, that they will leave, there are heritage trees along here too. They have said they will leave those, and there's a lot of undergrowth too, that they will leave if the neighbors here want them to. Some of the neighbors have asked for a mound there. Again, it's not in the commitments. We'll see if they agree to it. This is one of the reasons that PTRA has requested that Councilor Robinson call this down. It will give us another opportunity to negotiate some more. And we're waiting on the commitments from the developer, the final version that was approved at the hearing. Haven't received them yet. Once we get those, we'll be looking at them closely to see if there's some room for further negotiations. With that, I really don't have much else. Any additional questions?
You do plan to make other recommendations?
Yes.
Do you have any idea what those recommendations would be right now? Or do you have to wait? You feel you need to wait and see what they will bring back to you?
Right.
Are you taking any recommendations from the floor
I
tonight?
certainly can, yes.
Okay.
Well, what we wanted to do here tonight, thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Is I heard you say Marty had a presentation, so we want to give Marty time to come and make his presentation. And Marty, please, we certainly tarry with Susan, so please make your presentation shorter. And then we want to open up the floor to our public so that we can take any comments or questions. We have our board attorney here tonight that in the interim will take your questions, and perhaps if we need to get back to the developer, then we'll get those questions back to the developer. So that's how we want to handle the remainder of our time. Thank you, Susan.
You're quite
Come on,
welcome,
Marty.
thank you.
Thanks for giving me an opportunity.
Can't let nobody discussion.
Susan always tells me I'm supposed to give you my credentials. I was a public servant for over 40 years, and then I retired, and I worked for the government agencies, U.S. Geological Survey, Department of Environmental Management, and I spent all my time working on water. I taught students about water years before I retired at Indiana University. So I thought about water when this thing first came up, and I started looking at where does all this water that goes onto this property from the rainfall, where does it end up? And the more I studied the city's maps, and I wish I could have a PowerPoint here to show you this, but I did bring my little poster, just like it's science fair, and
Marty, so you'll know, you got about 15 minutes on this presentation, so Mr. Anderson's keeping clock on that.
all right. And I expect you want me near the microphone, correct?
That'd be fine.
Yeah. Well, forgive me for this
Doc,
meager
can you put
presentation.
it over there for him, Doc, so he
When he's
can,
talking, we
But,
can see it. You put it over there. Thank you. Dr.
Yeah,
Young.
we can-
As Susan said, what I
He'll need it.
discovered was that all of the water
I think he wants to see
that,
it.
that falls from the sky onto this development right here, okay, the red outline, plus all of the water from about 60 acres on the east side of I-465, all collects in 4 different drainage ways that go down to Eagle Creek via Fox Lake. And the creek is known as Hopewell Creek. And this is a real steep terrain. It drops 100 feet in less than a mile. And all of that water channels into Eagle Creek. Now, Eagle Creek, of course, is Eagle Creek Park right there at 79th Street. It's got the waterfowl area and the bird migration paths that all congregate there where that lake begins. But Eagle Creek itself is a flowing stream, of course, that has a vast watershed. Well, my concern was if they come in here and pave acre after acre with parking lots and putting up roofs and sidewalks, that's an impervious surface. That does not let the water soak in as it naturally does now. And all of that water has to go somewhere. It's an increased amount of rainfall. You know, on average, we get 44 inches of rain, and some of our rainfall events every year, and some of our rainfall events in 24 hours are as much as 4 inches of rain. We've had months on record with 8 to 13 inches of rain. Now that water is going to find its way right now into the wetlands that are there, and the forests that are there, and that system holds it back. The creeks that come out of there right now are naturally shallow and not very wide because the system holds that water back. But now all this water has to find some place to go because it's not soaking into the ground. It's not being stored for the trees. It's not becoming part of that wetland. And so they've got to figure out a way to hold that back by regulation. But it's not contain, it's actually detain or retain. So all they have to do is hold back the water so that it doesn't flow any faster off the property than it does now, based on old meteorological records, which we realize are being rapidly outdated by climate change. But the increased amount of water, every acre that sits there that gets the annual rainfall is producing another 1.2 million gallons, and that water is always going to be an increased amount that is going to leave that property. It's not going to go away. It can't be held there forever. It just has to be slowed down. That's all the rule is. My fear is all that extra water coming through these drainage ways when we have a high rainfall event. We've seen them, and we're going to get more of them. It's going to create an increase of flash flooding and long-term flooding on Eagle Creek. We're not prepared for this. And my other concern about Eagle Creek is that all this water is going to contain various contaminants. Sediment is a contaminant. You stir up the soil with a bulldozer, sediment is going to be moving. Then you put in a factory and you put in a hotel and a parking lot. The things that run off of that are going to be in that water. Eagle Creek Reservoir is part of the city's public water supply, right? It's a great fishing lake, isn't it? We love this park. This park is going to be affected by it. Now, I chair the Eagle Creek Park Advisory Committee, and the park has a foundation. It's a charity, And the charity is a 501c3, so they can't come in here and lobby on behalf of the park, but the 20 members that I represent, and some of these people have been involved with the park for over 25 years. It's a very broad-based citizens group. And when we heard about this, we unanimously said, no, leave this zoning residential. Residential creates a sustainable water resource. It protects the natural resources. The comprehensive plan calls that property an environmentally sensitive area, and they are so right. Those wetlands and those forests have been there since before World War II. They have trees just like we have at Eagle Creek that are 150 years old or older. I mean, it'd take 3 of us to get our arms around some of them. And when you start changing a forest, everything in nature is connected, and you start running they're going to run the road right through the wetlands. I mean, that's just their plan. You're going to change those wetlands. You're going to change the connections to those trees. And I am convinced that of the over 500 heritage trees, we're going to lose up to 150 or more of them just based on the plan here. But then there's attrition. And in nature, because things are connected, and you start pulling out trees and changing wetlands, that whole system's resiliency is going to be modified. It's going to be degraded. And so all of us that live in this kind of forested area that's between Eagle Creek and this property, and which includes the forest on this property, we're all going to see those changes. We're going to see the wildlife leave. And, there's endangered species in there. This is just one of those places that's really unique.
Let me ask you a question.
Alonzo?
I'm glad you hit that, Marty. So, a couple of things. I was thinking that there were migrating animals that they're going to run that road through, that if they run that road through, they're going to separate the path of some migrating animals. I thought you wouldn't be able to do that if they were a protected species.
Well, we can always raise the issue of the Endangered Species Act when the federal government and the state government get involved in giving them permits. But this, to me, is like, trying to manage the horse that's gotten out of the barn because you forgot to close the door. If we'd left the door closed, those issues wouldn't come up.
Gotcha.
Now, and the other thing, and Susan was bringing this up, this would be a great candidate forest there. Maybe the 40 to 70 acres there that has the 2 wetland lakes and the steep topography and all the old trees. It would be a good area to preserve in a land trust. There are groups like the Central Indiana Land Trust that would be able to broker a deal like that if it was able to be sold and protected. And it doesn't have to be a city park. It can just be preserved as a nature preserve. But imagine the potential then for people wanting to live near this nature preserve. And also remember all the benefits to everybody who lives in Pike Township by having trees there to hold the carbon, to filter out the smoke from the fires in Canada, to make the air pollution and noise and temperature moderated. I mean, trees are just a good resource for our community. That would be a great thing that could happen, and it would be a really attractive place to live near. And I think it would not take 30 years, as Susan said, to get people to build houses in the remaining area if it would be developed. And there are working farms in Traders Point, and that is the best soil right there on those 2 old farms that you could ask for.
Yeah.
So that's another consideration. But changing that water cycle and putting more water into Eagle Creek and into Eagle Creek Park, and then if we end up with more water coming in a flood event from all those miles and acres upstream, we're going to see properties affected. And the last major flood we had was only 10 years ago. It raised the water level near Eagle Creek by 12 feet. There were bridges underwater. So, I mean, I'm just not making, a scare tactic prediction here. This stuff has happened already, and it can happen again. You can see the maps here that show where the flood areas are predicted based on the old data. You've been so good to let me get excited about water and talk to you about it. And I hope I caught some of the main themes that you'd be interested in. Please ask me questions.
Yeah, you have a question right here.
I guess the solution you would propose to the water situation would be Because they can't well, based on what they said at one of the meetings I attended, they can't reroute, I think was the word they used, the natural things that are already set up, but they have to change something, otherwise they can't do what they need to do. So what is the answer, I guess, to?
Well, of course, you would understand, and I think this is a bad land use decision, that the more appropriate use of this land is to have homes with yards and less pavement. And even though that they're going to have to destroy some of these wetlands just to store enough of the water to meet the current requirements on retention. Remember, the amount that's coming down is still going to leave the property eventually, and it's going to add to the flow in Eagle Creek and all those streams. There's not a whole lot that can be done in a commercial development to modify this. Now, if they want to spend the money for a variety of things that we see in a few communities, like, you know, a rain garden or a catchment area along a curb or a porous pavement, those things can help. But those are mostly aimed at adding more water into the subsurface for another purpose. And that's not really what they're trying to do here. You know, they're just trying to get structures built to develop their ground, as far as I can tell. So we would ask, you know, the city council to really look long and hard at the future of our city and how much they value the trees and the rural character of Traders Point and Pike Township out here will be changed. And Susan's absolutely right. This could be a domino effect that is not going to preserve the part of the township that we recognize right now. Now, I don't know if I answered your question. I just don't think it's going to be that easy to keep this problem from occurring if they do what they say they want to do with this rezoning.
I've got two questions, and
Sure.
hopefully you'll be able to answer them. You said that the water drainage, they talked about making a commitment to slow down the water drainage going into Eagle Creek, because if they can't slow that down, the erosion will theoretically change the face of those wetlands over time, correct?
Well, I mean, in fact, they did not make a commitment. They are required to follow the city's drainage ordinance. And it's a real complicated thing, and probably the best shorthand is you can't send more water off the property at a certain rate that it currently is happening. So you have to hold it back. So you have to build a big, deep place that you know, or a big, wide place to hold the water. But it's also based on the past rainfall patterns. And so because we've not seen their drainage plan, we're not sure exactly what they're going to do, but they've already carved out this central area. They call it a common park space. There's no park about it. You would not want to take your family to a picnic at a stormwater detention pond. It's not a park. That's just a misnomer. And although they're not building it, it's also changed from the current capacity of that land to hold, store, and gently release the water.
That's right.
These are going to be dramatic
maintain the
changes to the way the water happens on these 200 acres. And, I mean, we would want to see them follow the rules, but I'll forewarn everybody, you know, the meteorologists know that the climate is changing, the kinds of rainfall events that we have that are prolonged and high intensity, they're going to happen more often, and they're not required to design for that.
So that brings me to my last question. So when you deal with new areas that could potentially have flash flooding over a period of time, do you recall the fire department talking about in these meetings, or if they were there, talking about if they had to do water rescue? Because to my recollection, I don't know, I believe Pike has surface water rescue, but not deep water rescue. I think we have to rely on IFD coming from the Children's Museum, I think State Police, maybe DNR. But with these type of changes to areas where we typically don't have flash flooding, that could be room for potential multiple disasters. Have you heard of any thing from the fire department saying, hey, this may be something that may expand our resources too thin, or?
You know your profession, and that's a really good question.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was wondering,
think about
did
public
they-
safety. I think about people who I've talked to who have survived floods by being woken up in the middle of the night
Right.
and having to wade out of their homes and try to find high ground.
But nobody mentioned anything about that at all.
They did not ask the questions at the Metropolitan Development Commission that responded to issues that we brought up about water and drainage, about, you know, the place that has potentially contaminated soil and groundwater from an old hobby military museum there. They did not respond to our concerns about how this development still hasn't even had, and this is not environmental, but we have not seen an economic analysis that would tell you how many dollars are coming and when to support the school system. And I think that's a legit question that
Question on that
concerns
as
all
well.
of you. Yeah.
Ms. Blair, as it relates to, if I might dovetail on Vice President Anderson, did anything come up with public safety? Did public safety have any recommendations to receive some things to meet the need that Brother Anderson is talking about?
The only thing that came up about public safety was the tax dollars, the property tax dollars that this project will generate. They did, and it was based on their very first site plan, which did have more development in it, because obviously they took out about 48, 49 acres of developable, or what could have been developable land, to make it to a preservation district. So the analysis they did on their very first site plan, although we didn't get any explanation along with what they presented to us, it just showed what each section would cost for development, what it would cost for an end user, and how many tax dollars that would generate. And they came up with $4 million. Now, they didn't give us a breakdown of how many of those dollars will actually stay in Pike Township, because we all know property taxes go to the state, and then the state disseminates it. We don't know how much Pike school system will get, or how much the
Public
trustee's
safety.
office will get, or public safety. Correct. Obviously, it'll be a portion of that, but we don't know how much. Again, if it were single-family homes, the same pertains to single-family homes too, goes to the state. But I'm not so sure that if it were developed into single-family homes, that the tax dollars wouldn't be similar.
It would be what? Could you repeat that?
Could be similar. The other that I didn't mention, they did commit to, in their original proposal, they requested a variance of 90-foot tall buildings. There's not anything in Pike Township that's 90-foot tall, with the exception of the pyramids. It's, it's just going to loom. So they finally came back and did commit to only 4 stories. I went back to them and said, 4 stories is subjective. You can have 18-foot ceilings, you can have 20-foot ceilings, you can have 25-foot ceilings. So we need a number. We need a height number. The ordinance says 45 feet maximum. They would never come back and give us a number. They say in their commitments 4 stories, but yet their variance of 90-foot tall was approved. At least, I believe it was. I watched a replay of the hearing just to confirm that. I didn't hear anything mentioned in the hearing while I was physically sitting there. So I thought, let me go back and play the hearing again, just to make sure I didn't miss something. It wasn't mentioned, and it was supposed to be amended. So that's another thing that Counselor Robinson could help us with, if it gets called down.
Another question related to the schools, with the type of apartments and condos that they've talked about, did they have any discussion on how many students they would think would live in, are these single-family, or not,
Well, they believe that it's going to be young professionals, pretty much fresh out of college. Their vision is this will be a live, and it's a current developmental buzzword trend, live, work, and play.
okay, so kind of following the Ironworks model that you talked about
Yes.
earlier, that it's.
Yes,
Yeah, that is the trend throughout the country,
it is.
the Ironworks model.
It is. But 20 years from now, it'll be something else.
Something else. But 20 years from now, school district still has a desire.
Yes.
So I'm asking you to bring a recommendation, talk with our superintendent, and just talk with him. And it might be something we can do for our teachers. It might be something we can do for our students. We cannot allow developers to come into Pike Township, misuse Eagle Creek Park, and not address education when they come in this particular jurisdiction of the state. Cannot do that. We've already suffered with Dow Chemical, not Dow Chemical, but the chemical company in Zionsville there.
It used to be Dow.
Yeah, it used to be Dow.
It's a contract.
You know what Pike got out of that?
Versa now.
They got garden plots. Got garden plots. Hit this district for $30 million, $5 million in increments. We got garden plots. Now, I might not be here in the next few years, but long as I'm here, we're going to fight, not discuss, fight to make this district better.
Now,
I'm
let me,
sorry,
let-
Brother
let me,
President, I'm
let me-
sorry.
let me just interject here. So again, thank you, Susan. We
You're
want to open up to and be respectful to our public and give
Excuse me,
them
President, I'm sorry.
comments also again, but we are here as a board to be informed about the development that's already going on. And so whereas all of us have an individual perspective, as a collective board, we're here to be informed for information. And as again, I allude to that we have our school counselor, board of counselor here, and if need be, when we need to, we'll field questions and we'll get back to their counsel in a timely manner. Thank you all. At this time, we open up now to the public for any of you that may have questions and concerns, or a question that you would like for we, the board, to get back to the Developers Council. And certainly our council will handle that in a timely manner. You can step up and do that at this time, state your questions, and she'll record them. And Dr. Young will help us record them, and we'll make sure we compile all questions and concerns at this time. And you can certainly step up to the platform if you like to. Just question, that's all they have is question.
My name's Judy Brown Fletcher. I own property in the Pike Township. I have concerns about the traffic on 86th Street with their design. I don't see how this roundabout is going to really handle the type of traffic that is going to be generated, particularly by the apartments and the commercial use. And I worry about school buses. I've driven this back and forth just to look and pretend I'm a school bus driver. I don't see how it's going to be feasible unless they put an additional roundabout on Conroe, just to take the pressure off. And I think that their traffic plans, as presented, are not just inadequate. I think there's just not enough information. So that has really, really concerned me. They probably feel, oh, 79th Street will take the pressure off. Yeah, what about the bridge to the east? And what about the drop-offs on 79th Street? I've driven that repeatedly for over 50 years. And I don't see how you can change that to be anything but a sharp drop-off with erosion underneath. The other thing is...
So I'm sorry, what's your question? I'm sorry, what's your
So my
question?
question is, what can be done to pressure the developer to come up with a better transportation design?
Thank you.
The other question I have is about that park that's not a park, that's going to be open to the general public. Who's going to patrol that? Who's going to be monitoring it for public safety? Teenagers, are they going, I mean, is this going to be IMPD? Is this going to be the Sheriff's Department? And it's a retention pond. We know what happens in the retention ponds. Is it going to be fenced off? And how are you going to keep kids from climbing into it and then drowning? I mean, it's just too many, and it's awfully close to that road of marsh. Who's going to be responsible for policing the park that's not a park?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Next.
Thank you for the time. Dave Skeels, 26-year resident of Pike Township. I live in the West 86th edition. I guess the points I would like to address are only 5. Number 1, kids' school safety. I don't know if anyone has driven West 86th during rush hour, but as my colleague has already pointed out, especially when the sun is shining east and west during the solstice times, it is dangerous already. We're talking about maybe adding 1,200 cars in that area with the roundabout. It seems infeasible, and I'm worried about our school children. Secondly, I'll ask a question. What can be done about West 86th flooding? Marty has pointed out it's basically like this when you look at the property. Is that, I mean, I'm not exaggerating too much. West 86th neighborhood has already experienced flooding at the front of the neighborhood 3 years ago, something in that time frame. So how are we going to prevent that flooding? But last, I guess my third point, I'll combine points all together, is we have wetlands there that should be important to our students, should be important to our kids, their health. Green space has been shown over and over again to promote mental health and even additional education in a better learning environment. Since the rollback, Indiana State Legislature rolled back the wetlands protection in 2021. Since then, I just heard on the radio today, we've lost 260 acres of wetlands. That means that our kids won't get to see bald eagles, which are present in Eagle Creek. There's a pileated woodpecker, that's the one with a great big cone. Little brown bats there, spotted turtles are there. There are 100 different animal species and 100 different plant species that are at risk of going away. Finally, with respect to the trees, yes, the old growth trees have to be replaced. As I understand it, they do not have to be replaced in our township even. Can somebody confirm that?
They do not. They do not.
So they could be anywhere in Indianapolis or Marion County?
They can be.
Okay. So those are my concerns. I worry about the children. I worry about the safety of the entire community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are good concerns, and those are good worries.
Hello, good evening, members of
Good
the
evening.
board. My name is Lori Perdue, and I am the director of Forests for Indy, which is an urban forest protection program with the Indiana Forest Alliance. And we have been involved with the overview of seeing this development from its first stages when it was brought to the Planning Commission and the Board of the Zoning Board for a rezone. And it is part of my job to preserve the forested lands in Indianapolis. And 3 years ago, the IFA mapped the 25 most valuable forests in Indianapolis. And we put those on a map based on the services that those forests provide. The shade and cooling nature of a forest that can reduce the temperature of an area by a significant amount of degrees. Water retention, as well as flood control and things like that. This forest was like number 7 on our top 25. It is an ecologically sensitive area, not just because it has large trees and a wetland, but because it is part of the water flow, the water retention that goes into Eagle Creek, goes into Eagle Creek Forest, and then it goes into Eagle Creek Reservoir, which is reaching its capacity. And although it is like the largest freshwater supply for the city, it is also our largest flood prevention mitigation mechanism. If we overtax that reservoir, Indianapolis floods. Everything south of you floods. The cost of upgrading that reservoir would go through federal and state and would take a very long time and cause a period of time that is a great risk to your community. I just want to make another couple of points. The ecologically sensitive nature is part of the metropolitan development plan, and the master plan designates this area specifically as a part of land that the City Parks Department has its eye on and has had its eye on for at least 10 years for an extension to Eagle Creek Park. That information was, and the Eagle Creek Greenway planning being, by the city. The Full Circle Greenways plan is to encircle the whole city in non-motorized traffic trails like the Monon Trail and the White River Greenway. The idea is to use that area for the Greenway. We can put that wish away if they develop this property the way they want to. So looking at the future of Indianapolis, there's a lot that's hanging on this one development. If this development passes, it's in direct conflict with the comprehensive master plan, and it sets a precedent. It sets a precedent that will endanger more and more forests closer to Eagle Creek Park, closer to the water supply and the flood retention. It is something that really needs to be considered, and you need to look at the forests as something that serves you. Pike Township in Indianapolis will have to pay for the water mitigation and the drainage changes. That will come out of your pockets. That will come out of the city coffers and will be less for you. And so this substantial old forest is valuable in itself as it stands. And I thank you.
So what would be your ask?
What would be my ask?
Yes.
So the current zoning is for large lot residential, and that is consistent. That is consistent with the master plan. The master plan is up for a renewal in 2.5 years. So at that time, it would make sense to make a different vision of Pike Township in that master plan. We have public input in the master plan. It comes to meetings and groups like yours for their opinion and their input. And when that master plan was approved, that process was honored. To disregard it now is essentially disregarding public opinion.
So do not disregard the master plan.
Exactly. I mean,
You
it's
get
meant
that?
to be
You get that?
flexible based on community needs, but what is the community need?
Yeah.
There are other hotels in Pike. There are other commercial districts that are not thriving at a level that serves you well as a
Right.
tax base.
Okay.
There are other commercial and retail. There are other places for manufacturing, like Intech Park. There are other places in your township that can be developed in a much more cost-effective way and bring you that tax base that's vital to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
So,
welcome.
Thank you. In interpretation, look for other places. Yes.
Thank you, Board, Mr. President. My name's Tony Alexander. I'm a almost 35-year long resident here in Pike Township. And my comment actually kind of goes on the heel of what the lady just said before me. When I look at economic development and the necessity that we have in Pike Township, I believe we need economic development. However, I don't think that this property is the prime property for us to have that economic development. We look just beyond on the other side of the highway, as the lady just mentioned before me, just on the other side of the highway, we have Traders Point, which is losing another anchor. So what I would like to see, as you ask what would our ask be, I would like us to ask our city officials to go back to the negotiating table with Kite, the owner of the property, see if we can find some other properties that will be more feasible so that we could experience the growth in the tax base where we don't have all of the issues that we have with the drainage, the forestry. I believe this is creating more issues than solving any issues. So I think if we could say, okay, city officials, understanding that Kite has already put a lot of money into the purchasing of the property, but let's come together and see what we can do, where we can find you another property that will be just as valuable and even more viable for the economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, school board
evening.
members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dr. Tara Evans. I have been a 22-year resident of Pike Township, a 5-year resident of West 86 neighborhood, which is directly across the street from the main entrance of this proposed development. I have sent 4 children through Pike Township schools, a current parent of Fishback Creek Public Academy and a first grader. So I am vested in the Pike Township community and have given back to this community and care about the outcomes associated with it. And so I'm here to speak in opposition of the development, and I love that you're asking what the residents are asking so that I can share that information too. And as a resident, we're not opposed to developments. We want to revitalize the neighborhood. But the issue is with the green space that's currently in existence, currently zoned for more homes that are much needed. We would love to see a development across the street become revitalized so that we're not losing anchor stores that my family frequents with the all boys and sports family like Dick's Sporting Goods, and so that and with Scouts and all of those things. So how can we revitalize a place that's currently becoming more and more depressed, that is currently zoned for exactly what they want to do? Why not take a place that needs that revitalization and do exactly what you're proposing? And so that's my first recommendation.
What was that question again, Dr. Kerr? I'm sorry. How can you do what now?
So why don't they take their proposal and do that across the street in a place that's already zoned for a mixed-use commercial development and that's currently failing? How can you revitalize a space that we need to be thriving that's currently not, with what your plan is intended to do?
Got it.
Also, when part of my concern with this is the bait and switch. You heard a lot of people say they proposed an ironworks. And so what I learned was early on, they did propose an ironwork type development. But in the zoning appeals hearing just a couple of weeks ago, what they committed to was a 3-star development, and ironworks is a 4-star development. So the bait was, oh, let's tempt them with Ironworks, a development that everybody sees that's pretty and that people frequent even here in Pike Township. But what we're going to give you is what you already have across the street that's failing. So that doesn't sit well with me at all. Also does not breed trust as, again, a 22-year resident of Pike Township. And the space in question is currently zoned, as many people have said, for residential use. What I've learned is from those that are environmentalists is that if it's actually used for its intended use, it doesn't disturb the ecosystem and the environment in the way that flattening the land for a commercial mixed-use development. So again, we all know that it's landlocked in Pike Township right now. Homes are going at increased rates, and there's a shortage of homes available. My own realtor, who sold me my home less than 5 years ago, sent me a letter to ask if I would sell my own home. No, because first of all, where are we going to go? We've committed to Pike, but also the final 2 lots in our neighborhood that does line the highway and the exit. So again, you can have a successful neighborhood that lines the exit of 465. There aren't any more lots available, so there's a need for more single-family homes in Pike Township, which again is the intended use for that space. And so we need homes. We need to preserve our wetlands, and having additional homes would allow us to do that. Having additional homes would bring more students, more enrollment into Pike Township. Having additional homes would bring more property tax revenue into Pike Township. And having more homes would bring more neighbors with a vested interest in our community versus people who are going to just be in and out throughout the day. And so my ask, in addition to recommending that, A, they move across the street to the current place that's zoned for that development, also that they build what its intended use. But my ask for all of you today is to email, call, show up, and ask Councilor Leroy Robinson to call down this proposal when it's seen at the city-county meeting, because that's our only way that we can have an opportunity to share our concerns to the full council. And then you see all of the brochures that you have. All of the email addresses for the city council members are right here. All you've got to do is type them in, or you can go to the website, copy and paste, and send your letter so that they can all see it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. All right. Well, is there any others that I think really technically we have really had a robust meeting tonight, and certainly the school board is concerned. And that is our reason for meeting tonight, to be informed, and we certainly have been informed. Again, we are not here to take a biased position either way. We certainly want to hear the information tonight and then make a decision on what's best for our district and our families. All right?
President.
Yes, go ahead.
I saw the trustee come in. I wonder if she could answer the question about public safety and this new project, and how public safety will be increased on her end, if it is going to be increased.
Trustee, if you want to answer that, Dr. Moore has proposed a question to you. You certainly can answer it if you like. Okay, she says she doesn't have the information to share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee, for coming and being a part of our, at least dropping in tonight. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sue Swanson. I've actually gone to the Pike Township schools, currently live in Pike Township, and have sent a child through the school system. The one thing that I'm really concerned about is the congestion. We don't have the roads that are going to be able to get back and forth. They're all 2-lane roads. So we'll have more accidents. We will have much more congestion, especially when people are coming and going to work in the morning, to schools. Our roads aren't equipped to handle it. Plus, they're in bad shape right now. Conroe's two lanes, 79th's 2 lanes. Once you hit West 86, going west on 86th Street, that goes down to 2 lanes. So we're talking, the roads aren't equipped for it. And so we're going to have a lot of safety issues as well.
So what's your ask?
My ask is, again, I don't think this is the right place we need to keep it residential and not having so much of this extra traffic coming into our area. It's only going to be another Fishers.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, public, for coming out tonight. We did stream also, so we were live streamed tonight as well. So several our community did listen in. And again, we will, our board council will reach back out, and then we will certainly make sure as a district, you stay informed with information that's going back and forth with we, the school board, and the developer. All right, thank you all. Drive home safely. Have a good evening.